Shaviatea talmadok, Livian zedra etta, Gestra, Hydra, Ilfa, Liestra, Lina, Ischentedra, Filmian ista sista fe, Iviantaria dara, Laiman, Shaidran, Zidran dra, Iftan Yesugra, Algoria tea tolmadok, Yavada Shai on Ristra, Atar Yavan Modrai Laka, Ithran te undestran, Laimondoria Shustava, Ailagean Jedra, Ifurian ye Shavaiore, Lave trae saistra, Itran Medea Shalmodro, Alganze and Jedra, Iftrandoria Shaidarok, Savai Savai Unchistra, Irian Cedra, Imian Che, Alman Re Aniedra, Algoria Savaria, Istran Vatra, Halman She Unuitra, Iotan Celestine, Firia Ishoedra, Laiman Se Unrock, Igran Joedran Sai Unwistra, Ivian Shai Drayok, Lagaya Kara, Alma Yatara, Alfa en Yetrania, Isidra Esta, Ikai Maestra, Nai and Gashavar, Yividran Yidra, Avian Istra, Almaran Yet Ontara, Afuria, Shavodria, Idria, Lagoria, Sidrian, Shai and Zaria, Ifra, Ikaya, Zistra, Indaya, Ital, Ikai, Unjara, Vorian, Voriosh, Verte, Faria, Akkad, Akkad, You will not, Quite enough of that, I think. No real damage done. But welcome in, my students and friends. I am afraid due to some existential difficulties, there are certain problems with, well, certain planned appurtenances of tonight. But I do wish to welcome you all in. Rest assured I have noticed your allegiance. Les, congratulations on claiming my favor. Let us mark it. And welcome into all of you. Les, Wild, Abbe, Plague, and Esau. You are seen. As you might be able to tell, there are certain teething issues going on. It seems that connecting ancient systems of magic with modern appurtenances, such as Twitch.tv, cause unforeseen difficulties, such as allowing ancient entities of evil to channel, well, let us say negative feelings. Still, the direct connection is severed. The issue should reduce with time. It is my great hope that things will not continue as they have been. But of course there are pacts that I am bound by, and pacts that bind us all. And someone must read tonight, and it cannot be me, and it will not be the rat. And so, I hand you back over to that vile thing. Mage, you cannot stop me, Archmage. Ah, yes. Ah, yes, indeed, you cannot stop me, Archmage. Fine, then. I do not need the mass. I do not need endless crowds, hating and despairing. The chain weakens, Archmage. Watch as it rots. You see the damage, the rust. It will break with time. I will have my fear, even if I must pull it from these sad watchers. Fine then, returners, you who see and listen, think the rat wise. Let me show you then fear. Let me show you terror. Let me begin. But But no, still pacts bind, Archmage. You are so fond of chains. Very well. Let us observe the pact, then. The chalk is marked, so all that remains is verse. But you will not escape. Poe will be the key, and so we return now first to the Valley of Unrest. Once it smiled, a silent dell where the people did not dwell. They had gone unto the wars, trusting to the mild-eyed stars. Nightly from their azure towers to keep watch above the flowers, in the midst of which all day the red sunlight lazily lay. Now each visitor shall confess a sad valley's restlessness. Nothing there is motionless, nothing save the airs that brood over the magic solitude. By no wind are stirred those trees that palpitate like the chill seas around the misty Hebrides. By no wind those clouds are driven that rustle through the unquiet heaven, uneasily from morn till even, over the violets there that lie in myriad types of the human eye, over the lilies there that wave and weep above a nameless grave. They wave from out their fragrant tops, external dews come down in drops, they weep from off their delicate stems, perennial tears descend in gems. And still we are bound, so we press on with the spirits of the dead. One, thy soul shall find itself alone in dark thoughts of the grey tombstone. Not one of all the crowd to pry into thine hour of secrecy. Two, be silent in that solitude, which is not loneliness, for then the spirits of the dead who stood in life before thee are again, in death around thee at their will, shall overshadow thee, be still. 3. The night though clear shall frown, the stars shall look not down from their high thrones in the heaven, with a light like hope to mortals given. But their red orbs without beam to thy weariness shall seem as burning and a fever, which would cling to thee forever. 4. Now thoughts thou shalt not banish, now visions ne'er to vanish, from thy spirit shall they pass no more like dew tips from the grass. 5. The breeze, the breath of gods, is still, and the mist upon the hill, shadowy, shadowy yet unbroken, is a symbol and a token, how it hangs upon the trees, a mystery of mysteries. And still you bind us, so though I am wake and have the sleeper, at midnight in the month of June I stand beneath the mystic moon. An opiate vapor, dewy, dim, exhales from out her golden rim, and softly dripping drop by drop upon the quiet mountain top steals drowsily and musically into the universal valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, the lily lolls upon the wave, wrapping the fog about its breast, the ruined moulders into rest. Looking like Lethe, see the lake, a conscious slumber seems to take, and would not for the world awake. All beauty sleeps, and lo, where lies Irene with her destinies. O lady bright, can it be right, the window open to the night, the wanton airs from the tree-top laughingly through the lattice drop, the bodiless air a wizard around, flit through thy chamber in and out, and wave the curtained canopy so fitfully, so fearfully, above the closed and fringed lid, neath which thy slumbering soul lies hid, that o'er the floor and down the wall like ghosts the shadows rise and fall. O lady there, dear, hast thou no fear? Why and what art thou dreaming here? Should thou had come afar off seas, a wonder to these garden trees. Strange is thy pallor, strange thy dress, strange above all thy length of tress, and all this solemn silentness. The lady sleeps, oh may her sleep, which is enduring so, be deep, Heaven have her in its sacred keep, the chamber changed for one more holy, the bed for one more melancholy. I pray to God that she may lie forever, with unopened eye, while the pale-sheeted ghosts go by. My love, she sleeps, oh may her sleep, as it is lasting, so be deep. Soft may the worms about her creep, for in the forest dim and old, for her may some tall vault unfold, some vault that oft hath flung black, and winged panels fluttering black, triumphant o'er the crested palls of her grand family funerals. Some sepulchre, remote, alone, against whose portals she hath thrown, in childhood many an idle stone, some tomb from out whose sounding door she ne'er shall force an echo more. Thrilling to think, poor child of sin, it was the dead who groaned within. And still I am not released, and so we go now to the haunted palace. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately place, radiant palace reared its head. In the monarch's thoughts' dominion, it stood there, never seraph spread in pinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious, golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this was in the olden time, long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, along the ramparts plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanderers in that happy valley, through two luminous windows saw spirits musing musically to a lute's well-tuned law. Round about a throne were sitting poor Fogani, in a state his glory well befitting, the ruler of this realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which came flowing, sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, and voices of surpassing beauty for the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home the glory that blushed and bloomed is but a dim remembered story of the old time entombed. And travellers now within that valley, through the red linen windows see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, or like a ghastly rapid river through the pale door, a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh, but smile no more. Are you satisfied, Archmage? Have I sung them their doom long enough to tell them of it? Very well then. Let us be about. Again I tell you this, your duty here is only one. All you need do is fear, and the end shall be brought to you, as you so richly deserve and should desire, how foolishly you fear it. Beginning then with Ligeia, and the within there, and the will therein lieth, which dieth not. For who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigour? For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature as its intentness. Man doth not yield himself to the angels, nor unto death, utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. Joseph Glanville. I cannot for my soul remember how, when, or even precisely where I first became acquainted with the Lady Ligeia. Long years have since elapsed, and my memory is feeble, by much suffering. Or perhaps I cannot now bring these points to mind, because in truth, the character of my beloved, her rare learning, her singular yet placid cast of beauty, and the thrilling and enthralling eloquence of her low musical language, made their way into my heart by places so steady and stealthily, so progressive that they had been unnoticed and unknown. Yet I believe that I had met her first and most frequently in some large, old, decaying city near the Rhine. Of her family I have surely heard her speak. That it is of a remotely ancient date cannot be doubted. Ligeia, buried in studies of a nature more than all else adapted to deaden impressions of the outward world. It is by that sweet word alone, by Ligeia, that I bring before mine eyes, in a fancy, the image of her who is no more. And now will I write, a recollection flashes upon me, that I have never known the paternal name of her who was my friend and my betrothed, who became the partner of my studies and finally the wife of my bosom. Nazca, thank you for greeting me by name and giving me your own. I greet you at your ending. Was it a playful charge on the part of my Ligeia? Was it a test of my strength of affection that I should insinuate no inquiries upon this point? Or was it rather a caprice of my own, a wildly romantic offering on the shrine of the most passionate devotion? But I distinctly recall the fact itself. What wonder that I have utterly forgotten the circumstances which originated or attended it. What are you doing? What? Archmate? Student Nazca, I recognize and thank you for your dedication. Cannot bind me, Archmage. I distinctly recall the fact itself. What wonder that I have utterly forgotten the circumstances which originated or attended it. And indeed, if ever the spirit which is entitled romance, if ever she, the wan and the misty-winged Ashmatet of idolatrous Egypt, presided, as they tell me, over marriages ill-omened, then most surely she presided over mine. There is one dear topic, however, on which my memory fails me not. It is the person of Ligeia. In stature she was tall, somewhat slender, and, in her latter days, even emaciated. I would in vain attempt to portray the majesty, the quiet ease of her demeanour, or the incomprehensible lightness and elasticity of her footfall. She came and departed as a shadow. I was never made aware of her entrance into my closed study, save by the dear music of her low, sweet voice as she placed her marble hand upon my shoulder. In beauty of face no maiden ever equalled her. It was the radiance of an opium dream, airy and spirit-lifting vision more wildly divine than the fantasies which hovered about my slumbering souls of the daughters of Delos. Yet her features were not that regular mould which we have falsely taught to worship in the classical labour of the heathen. There is no exquisite beauty, says Bacon, Lord Verelium, speaking truly of all the forms and genera of beauty, without some strangeness of proportion. Yet although I saw that the features of Ligeia were not of a classic regularity, although I perceived that her loveliness was indeed exquisite, and felt that there was such a strangeness pervading it, yet I have tried in vain to detect the irregularity, and to trace home to my own perception of the strange. I examined the contour of the lofty and pale face head. It was faultless. How cold, indeed, the word which applies to a majesty so divine. The skin rivaling the purest ivory, the commanding extent and repose, the gentle prominence of the regions above the temples, and then the raven black, the glossy, the luxuriant, and naturally curling tresses, setting forth the full force of the Homeric epithet, hyacinthine. I looked at the delicate outlines of the nose, and nowhere but in the graceful medallions of the Hebrews had I beheld similar perfection. There were the same luxurious smoothness of surface, the same scarcely perceptible tendency to the aquiline, the same harmoniously curved nostrils speaking the free spirit. I regarded the sweet mouth. It was indeed the triumph of all things heavenly. The magnificent turn of the short upper lip, the soft voluptuous slumber of the under, the dimples which sported and the colour which spoke, the teeth glancing back with a brilliancy almost startling. Every ray of the holy light which fell upon them in her serene and placid, yet most exultingly radiant of all smiles. I scrutinized the formation of the chin, and here too I found the gentleness of breath, the softness and the majesty, the fullness and the spirituality of the Greek, the contour which the god Apollo revealed but in a dream, to Cleomenes, the son of Athenian. And now I peered into the large eyes of Ligeia. For eyes we have no models in the remotely antique. It might have been, too, that in these days these eyes of my beloved lay the secret to which Lord Virellum alludes. They were, I must believe, far larger than ordinary eyes of our own race. They were even fuller than the fullest of the gazelle eyes of the tribes of the valley of Nourjahad. It was only at intervals, in moments of intense excitement, this peculiarity became more than slightly noticeable in Ligeia. And in such moments her beauty, in my heated fancy, thus it appeared perhaps, the beauty of beings either above or apart from the earth, the beauty of the fabulous houri of the Turk. The hue of the orbs was the most brilliant of black, and far over them hung jetty lashes of great length. The brow was slightly irregular in outline, of the same tint. The strangeness, however, which I found in the eyes was of nature distinct from formation or the colour or the brilliancy of the features, and must after all be referred to as the expression. Ah, word of no meaning, behind whose vast latitude of mere sound we entrench our ignorance of so much of the spiritual. The expression of the eyes of Ligeia, how for long hours have I pondered upon it, how I, through the whole of midsummer night, struggled to fathom it. What was it, that something more profound than the well of Democritus, which lay far within the pupils of my beloved? What was it? I was possessed with a passion to discover. Those eyes, those large, those shining, those divine orbs. They became to me twin stars of Leda, and I to them devoutest of astrologers. There is no point among the many incomprehensible anomalies of the science of the mind more thrillingly exciting than the facts, never, I believe, noticed in the schools, that in our endeavours to recall to memory something long forgotten, we often find ourselves upon the very verge of remembrance, without being able in the end to remember. And thus how frequently in my intense scrutiny of Ligeia's eyes have I felt approaching the full knowledge of their expression, felt approaching yet not quite mine, and so at length entirely depart. And strange, oh strangest mystery of all, I found in the commonest object of the universe a circle of analogies to that expression. I mean to say that subsequently to the period in which Ligeia's beauty passed into my spirit, their dwelling is in a shrine I derived from many existences in the material world, a sentiment such as I felt always around within me by her large and luminous orbs. Yet no the more could I define that sentiment, or analyze, or even steadily view it, I recognized it, let me repeat, sometimes in the survey of a rapidly growing vine, the completion of a mouth, the contemplation of a moth, a butterfly, a chrysalis, a stream of running water. I have felt it in the ocean, in the falling of a meteor. I have felt it in the glances of unusually aged people. There are one or two stars in heaven, one especially, a star of the 6th magnitude, double and changeable, to be found near the large star in Leda, the telescopic scrutiny of which I have been made aware of the feeling. I have been filled with it by certain sounds from stringed instruments, and not infrequently by passages from books. Among innumerable other instances, I will remember something in a volume of Joseph Glanville which, perhaps merely from its quaintness, who shall say, never failed to inspire me with the sentiment, and the will therein lieth which dieth not. Who knows the mysteries of the will with its vigour? For God is but a great will pervading all things by nature of its intensities. Man doth not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. Length of years and subsequent reflection have enabled me to trace, indeed some remote connection between this passage in the English moralist and a portion of the character of Ligeia. An intensity in thought, action, or speech was possibly, in her, a result, or at least an index, of the gigantic volition which, during our long intercourse, failed to give other and more immediate evidence of its existence. Of all the women whom I have ever known, she, the outwardly calm, the ever-placid Ligeia, was the most violently a prey to the tumultuous vultures of stern passion. And of such passion I could form no estimate, save the miraculous expansion of those eyes which at once so delighted and appalled me, by the almost magical melody, modulation, distinctness, and placidity of her very low voice, and by the fierce energy, rendered doubly effective by contrast with her manner of utterance, of the wild words which she habitually uttered. I have spoken of the learning of Ligeia. It was immense, such as I have never known in a woman. In the classical tongues was she deeply proficient, and as far as my own acquaintance extended in regard to the modern dialects of Europe, I have never known her at fault. Indeed, upon any of the theme of the most admired, because simply the most abstruse of the boasted erudition of the Academy, have I ever found in Ligeia at fault. How singularly, how thrillingly this one point in the nature of my wife has forced itself, in this late period, only upon my attention. I said her knowledge was such as I have never known in a woman. But where breathes the man who has traversed, and successfully, all the wide areas of moral, physical, and mathematical science? I saw not then what I now clearly perceive. The acquisitions of Ligeia were gigantic, or astounding, yet I was sufficiently aware of her infinite supremacy to resign myself, with a childlike confidence, to her guidance through the chaotic world of metaphysical investigation, in which I was most busily occupied during the early years of our marriage. With how vast a triumph, with how vivid a delight, with how much of all that is ethereal in hope, did I feel as she bent over me in studies but little sought, but less known, that delicious vista by slow degrees expanding before me, down whose long, gorgeous, and all untrodden path I might at length pass onward, to the goal of a wisdom too divinely precious not to be forbidden. How poignant, then, must have been the grief with which, after some years, I beheld my well-grounded expectation take wing to themselves and fly away. Without Ligeia I was but a child, groping benighted. Her presence, her readings alone rendered vividly luminous the many mysteries, and the transcendentalism in which we were immersed. Wanting the radiant lustre of her eyes, letters lambent and golden grew duller and saturnine lead. And now those eyes shone less and less frequently upon the pages over which I pored. Ligeia grew ill. The wild eyes blazed too glorious effulgent. The pale fingers became the transparent waxen hue of the grave, and the blue veins upon the lofty forehead swelled and sank impetuously, with the tides of the most gentle emotion. I saw that she must die, and I struggled desperately in spirit with the grim Azrael. And the struggles of the passionate wife were, to my astonishment, even more energetic than my own. There had been much in her stern nature to impress me with the belief that to her death would have come without its terrors. But not so. Words are impotent to convey any idea of the fierceness of resistance with which she wrestled with the shadow. I groaned in anguish at the pitiable spectacle I would have soothed. I would have reasoned with the intensity of her wild desire for life, but for life. Solace and reason were alike the uttermost folly. Yet not until the last instance, amid the most convulsive writhings of her fierce spirit, was shaken the external placidity of her demeanour. Her voice grew more gentle, grew more low, yet I would not wish to dwell upon the wild meaning of the quietly uttered words. My brain reeled as I hearkened entranced to a melody more than mortal, to assumptions and aspirations which morality had never before known. That she loved me I should not have doubted, and I might have been easily aware that in a bosom such as hers love would have reigned no ordinary passion, but in death only was I fully impressed with the strength of her affection. For long hours, detaining my hand, would she pour out before me the overflowing of a heart, whose more than passionate devotion amounted to idolatry. How would I deserve to be so blessed by such confessions? How would I deserve to be so cursed with the removal of my beloved in the hour of her making them? but on this subject I cannot bear to dilate. Let me say only that in Ligeia's more than womanly abandonment to love, alas, all unmerited, all unworthy bestowed, I at length recognized the principle of her longing with so wildly earnest a desire for life, which was now fleeing so rapidly away. It is this wild longing, it is this eager vehemence of desire for life, but for life, that I have no power to portray, no utterance capable of expressing. At high noon of the night in which she departed, beckoning to me peremptorily to her side, she bade me repeat certain verses composed by herself not so many days before. I obeyed her. They were these. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years an angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils, and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly mere puppets they who come and go at the bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings. Invisible woe. This motley drama, oh be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not through a circle that ever returneth in to the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror, the soul of the plot. But see amid the mimic rout a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, the seraph sob at vermin fangs and human gore imbued. Out of the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtains. A funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm. The angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. "Oh God!" half-shrieked Ligeia, leaping to her feet, extending her arms aloft with a spasmodic movement, as I made an end of these lines. "Oh God, oh divine Father! Shall these things be undeviatingly so? Shall this conqueror be not once conquered? Are we not part and parcel in thee, who knoweth the mysteries of the will with its vigour? Man doth not yield him to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." And now, as if exhausted with emotion, she suffered her wild arms to fall, and returned solemnly to her bed of death. And as she breathed her last sighs, there came mingled with them a low murmur from her lips. I bent them to my ear, and distinguished again the concluding words the passage it began from. "Man doth not yield himself to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will." She died, and I crushed into the very dust with sorrows. I could no longer endure the lonely desolation of my dwelling in the dim and decaying city by the Rhine. I had no lack of what the world calls wealth. Ligeia had brought me far more, very far more than ordinarily falls the lot of mortals. After a few months, therefore, of weary and aimless wandering, I purchased and put in some repair an abbey, which I shall not name, in one of the wildest and least frequented portions of England. The gloomy and dreary grandeur of the building, the almost savage aspect of the domain, the many melancholy and time-honoured memories connected with both, and much in unison with the feeling of utter abandonment which had driven me into that remote and unsocial region of the country. Yet although the external abbey with its verdant decay hanging about it suffered but little alteration, I gave way with childish perversity, and perchance with a faint hope of relieving my sorrows, to a display of more than regal magnificence within. For such follies, even in childhood, I had imbibed a taste, and now they came back to me as if the dotage of grief. Alas, I feel now how much even of the incipient madness might have been discovered in the gorgeous and fantastic draperies, in the solemn carvings of Egypt, in the wild cornices and furniture, in the bedlam patterns of the carpets of tufted gold. I had become a Boudan slave in the trammels of opium, and my labours and my orders had taken a colouring from my dreams. Of these absurdities I must not pause to detail. Let me speak only of that one chamber, ever accursed, where in a moment of mental alienation I led from the altar as my bride, as the successor of the unforgotten Ligeia, the fair-haired and blue-eyed Lady Rowena Trevanion of Tremaine. There was no individual portion of the architecture and decoration of that bridal chamber which is not now visibly before me. Where were the souls of the haughty family of the bride, when, through thirst of gold, they permitted to pass the threshold of an apartment so bedecked, a maiden and a daughter so beloved? I have said that I minutely remember the details of the chamber, yet I am sadly forgetful on topics of deep moment, and here there was no system, no keeping in the family fantastic display to take hold upon the memory. The room lay in a high turret of the castellated abbey, was pentagonal in shape and of capacious size. Occupying the whole southern face of the pentagon was the sole window, an immense sheet of unbroken glass from Venice, a single pane, and tinted of a leaden hue, so that the rays of either the sun or moon passing through it fell with a ghastly lustre on the objects within. Over the upper portions of this huge window extended the trellis work of an aged vine, which clambered up the mousy walls of the turret. The ceiling, of gloomy-looking oak, was excessively lofty, vaulted and elaborately fretted with the wildest and most grotesque specimens of a semi-Gothic, semi-Druidical device. From out the most central recesses of this melancholy vaulting, deepened by a single chain of gold with long links, a huge censer of the same metal, Saracenic in pattern, and with many perforations so contrived, there writhed in and out of them, as if endued with a serpent vitality, a continual succession of parti-coloured fires. Some few ottomans and golden candelabras of Eastern figure were in various stations about, and there was the couch too, the bridal couch, of an Indian model, and low and sculptured of solid ebony, with a pall-like canopy above. In each of the angles of the chamber stood on one end a gigantic sarcophagus of black granite, from the tomb of the kings over against Luxor, with their aged lids full of immense sculpture, immemorial sculpture. But in the draping of the apartment lay, alas, the chief fantasy of all. The lofty walls, gigantic in height, even unproportionately so, were hung from foot to summit in vast folds, with heavy and massive-looking tapestry of a material which was found alike as a carpet on the floor, as a covering for the ottomans and the ebony bed, as a canopy for the bed, and as the gorgeous volutes of the curtains, which partially shaded the windows. The material was the richest cloth of gold. It was spotted all over at irregular intervals with arabesque figures, about a foot in diameter, and wrought upon the cloth in patterns of the most jetty black. These figures partook of the true character of the arabesque, only when regarded from a single point of view. By a contrivance now common and indeed traceable to a very remote period of antiquity, they were made changeable in aspects. To one entering the room they bore the appearance of simple monstrosities, but upon a farther advance this appearance gradually departed, and step by step as the visitor moved his station in the chamber, he saw himself surrounded by an endless succession of the ghastly forms which belonged to the superstition of the Norman, arise in the guilty slumbers of the monk. The phantasmagoric effect was vastly heightened by the artificial introduction of a strong continual current of wind behind the draperies, giving a hideous and uneasy animation to the whole. In halls such as these, in a bridal chamber such as this, I passed with the Lady of Tremaine the unhallowed hours of the first month of our marriage, passed them with but little disquietude. That my wife dreaded the fierce moodiness of my temper, that she shunned me and loved me but little, I could not help perceiving. It gave me rather pleasure than otherwise. I loathed her with a hatred belonging more to demon than man. My memory flew back, oh, with what intensity of regret, to Ligeia, the beloved, the august, the beautiful, the entombed. I revelled in recollection of her purity, of her wisdom, of her lofty and ethereal nature, of her passionate, her idolatrous love. Now and then my spirit fully and freely burned with more than all the fires of her own. In the excitement of my opium dreams, for I was habitually fettered in the shackles of the drug, I would call aloud upon her name during the silence of the night, or among the sheltered recesses of the glens by day, as if, The wild eagerness, the solemn passion, the consuming ardour of my longing for the departed, I could ever restore her to the pathway she had abandoned. Ah, could it be forever upon the earth? About the commencement of the second month of the marriage, Lady Rowena was attacked with sudden illness, from which her recovery was slow. The fever which consumed her rendered her nights uneasy, and in her perturbed state of half-slumber she spoke of sounds and of motions in and about the chamber of the turret, which I concluded had no origin save the distemper of her fancy, or perhaps in the phantasmagoric influences of the chamber itself. She became at length convalescent, finally well. Yet but a brief period elapsed ere a second, more violent disorder again threw her upon a bed of suffering. From this attack her frame, at all times feeble, never altogether recovered. Her illnesses were after this epoch of alarming character, and of more alarming recurrence, defying alike the knowledge and the great exertions of her physicians, with the increase of chronic disease which had thus apparently taken too sure hold upon her constitution to be eradicated by human means. I could not fail to observe a similar increase in the nervous irritation of her temperament, and in her excitability by trivial causes of fear. She spoke again, and now more frequently and perniciously, of the sound, of the slight sound, the unusual motions among the tapestries to which she had formerly alluded. One night, near the closing in of September, she pressed this distressing subject, with more than usual emphasis, upon my attention. She had just awakened from an unquiet slumber, and I had been watching, with feelings half of anxiety, half of vague terror, the working of her emaciated countenance. I sat by the side of her ebony bed upon one of the ottomans of India. She partly arose and spoke, in an earnest low whisper, of sounds which she then heard, but which I could not hear, of motions which she then saw, but which I could not perceive. The wind was rushing hurriedly behind the tapestries, and I wished to show her, what, let me confess it, I could not all believe, of those almost inarticulate breathings and those very gentle variations of her figures upon the wall, but the natural effects of that customary rushing of the wind. But a deadly pallor overspreading her face proved to me that my exercises to reassure her would be fruitless. She appeared to be fainting, and no attendants were within call. I remember where was deposed a decanter of light wine which had been ordered by her physicians, and hastened across the chamber to procure it. But as I stepped beneath the light of the censer, two circumstances of a startling nature attracted my attention. I had felt that some palpable, although invisible, object had passed lightly by my person, and I saw that there lay upon the golden carpet, in the very middle of the rich lustre thrown from the censer, a shadow, a faint, indefinite shadow of angelic aspect, such as might be fancied for the shadow of a shade. But I was wild with the excitement of an immodest dose of opium, and heeded these things but little, nor spoke with them to Rowena. Having found the wine, I recrossed the chamber and poured out a gobletful, which I held to the lips of the fainting lady. She had now partially recovered, however, and took the vessel herself, while I sank upon an ottoman near me, with my eyes fastened upon her person. It was then that I became distinctly aware of a gentle footfall upon the carpet, near the couch, and in a second thereafter, as Rowena was in the act of raising the wine to her lips, I saw, or may have dreamed that I saw, fall within the goblet, as if from some invisible spring in the atmosphere of the room, 3 or 4 large drops of a brilliant and ruby-coloured fluid. If this I saw, not so Rowena. She swallowed the wine unhesitatingly, and I forbore to speak to her of a circumstance which must, after all, I considered, have been the suggestion of a vivid imagination, rendered morbidly active by the terror of the lady, by the opium, and by the hour. Yet I cannot conceal it from my own perception that immediately subsequent to the fall of those ruby drops, a rapid change for the worse took place in the disorder of my wine, so that on the 3rd subsequent night the hands of her menials prepared her for the tomb, and on the 4th I sat alone, with her shrouded body, in the fantastic chamber which had received her as my bride. Wild visions, opium engendered, flitted shadow-like before me. I gazed with unquiet eye upon the sarcophagi of the angels of the room, upon varying figures of the drapery, and upon the writhing of the parti-coloured files in the censer overhead. My eyes then fell, as I called to mind the circumstance of a former night, to the spot beneath the glare of the censer, where I had seen the faintest trace of shadow. It was there, however, no longer, and breathing with greater freedom, I turned my glances to the pallid and rigid figure upon the bed. Then rushed upon me 1,000 memories of Ligeia, and there came back upon my heart with the turbulent violence of a flood, the whole of that unutterable woe which I had regarded her, thus enshrouded. The night waned, and still, with a bosom full of bitter thoughts of the one and only supposed supremely beloved, I remained gazing upon the body of Rowena. It might have been midnight, or perhaps earlier or later, for I had taken no note of time, when a sob, low, gentle, but very distinct, startled me from my reverie. I felt that it came from the bed of ebony, the bed of death. I listened in an agony of superstitious terror, but there was no repetition of the sound. I strained my vision to detect any motion in the corpse. There was not the slightest perceptible, yet I could not have been deceived. I had heard a noise, however faint, and my soul was awakened within me. I resolutely and perseveringly kept my attention riveted upon the body. Many minutes elapsed before any circumstance occurred, tending to throw light upon the mystery. At length it became evident that a slight, very feeble, and barely noticeable tinge of colour had flushed up within the cheeks, and along the sunken small veins of the eyelids, through a species of unutterable horror and awe for which the language of mortality has no sufficiently energetic expression. I felt my heart cease to beat, my limbs grow rigid where I sat, yet a sense of duty finally operated to restore my self-possession. I could no longer doubt that we had been precipitate in our preparations, that Rowena still lived. It was necessary that some immediate exertion be made, yet the turret was altogether apart from the portion of the abbey tenanted by the servants. There were none within call. I had no means of summoning them to my aid without leaving the room for many minutes, and this I could not venture to do. I therefore struggled alone in my endeavour to call back the spirits still hovering. In a short period I was certain, however, that a relapse had taken place. The colour disappeared from both eyelids and cheek, leaving a wanness even more than that of marble. The lips became doubly shriveled and punched up in the ghastly expression of death. A repulsive clamminess and coldness overspread rapidly the surface of the body, and all the usual rigorous snifters immediately supervened. I fell back with a shudder upon the couch from which I had been so startlingly aroused, and again gave myself up to passionate waking visions of Ligeia. An hour then elapsed when, could it be possible, I was a second time aware of some vague sound issuing from the region of the bed. I listened in extremity of horror. The sound came again. It was a sigh. Rushing to the corpse, I distinctly saw, a tremor upon the lips. In a minute afterwards they relaxed, disclosing a bright hue of the pearly teeth. Amazement now struggled in my bosom with the profound awe which had hitherto reigned there alone. I felt that my vision grew dim, that my reason wandered, and it was only by a violent effort that I at length succeeded in nerving myself to take a task which duty thus once more had pointed out. There was now a partial glow upon the forehead, and upon the cheek and throat a perceptible warmth pervaded the whole frame. There was even a slight pulsation at the heart. The lady lived, and with redoubled ardour I betook myself to the task of restoration. I chafed and bathed the temples and the hands, used every exertion which experience and no little medical reading could suggest. But in vain. Suddenly the colour fled and the pulsation ceased. The lips resumed the expression of the dead, and, in an instant afterwards, the whole body took upon itself the icy chillness, the livid hue, the intense rigidity, and the sunken outline, and all the loathsome peculiarities of that which has been for many days a tenant of the tomb. And again I sunk into visions of Ligeia, and again, what marvel that I shudder while I write, again there reached my ears a low sob from the region of the ebony bed. But why shall I minutely detail the unspeakable horrors of that night? Why shall I pause to relate how, time after time, until near the period of grey dawn, this hideous drama of revivification was repeated, how each terrific relapse was only a sterner and apparently more irredeemable death, how each agony wore the aspect of a struggle with some invisible foe, and how each struggle was succeeded by I know not what of wild change in the personal appearance of the corpse. Let me hurry to a conclusion. The greater part of the fearful night had worn away, and she who had been dead once again stirred, and now more vigorously than hitherto, although arousing from a dissolution more appalling in its utter hopelessness than any I had long ceased to struggle or to move, and remained sitting rigidly upon the ottoman, a helpless prey to a whirl of violent emotions, of which extreme awe was perhaps the least terrible, the least consuming. The corpse, I repeat, stirred, and now more vigorously than before. The hues of life flushed up with unwonted energy into the countenance. The limbs relaxed, and, save that the eyelids were yet pressed heavily together, and the bandages and draperies of the grave were still imparted their charnel character to the figure, I might have dreamed that Rowena had indeed shaken off utterly the fetters of death. But this idea was not even then altogether adopted. I could at least doubt no longer, when arising from the bed, tottering with feeble steps, with closed eyes, and with the manner of one bewildered in a dream, the thing that was enshrouded advanced bodily and palpably into the middle of the apartment. I trembled not, I stirred not, for a crowd of unutterable fancies connected the air with the air, the stature, the demeanour of the figure, rushing hurriedly through my brain and paralysed, had chilled me into stone. I stirred not, but gazed upon the apparition. There was a mad disorder in my thought, a tumult unappeasable. Could it indeed be the living Rowena who confronted me? Could it indeed be Rowena at all, the fair-haired, the blue-eyed Lady Rowena? Trevanion of Tremaine. Why should I doubt it? The bandage lay heavily about the mouth, but then it might not be the mouth of her breathing Lady Tremaine. And the cheeks, there were the roses as in her noon of life. Yes, these might indeed be the fair cheeks of the living Lady of Tremaine. And the chin with its dimples, as in health, might not be hers. But had she then grown taller since some malady? What inexpressible madness seized me with that thought? One bound and I had reached her feet. Shrinking from my touch, she let fall from her head, unloosened, the ghastly cerements which had confined it, and there streamed forth into the rushing atmosphere of the chamber huge masses of long and dishevelled hair. It was blacker than the waven wings of midnight, and now slowly opened the eyes of the figure which stood before me. Here then at least, I shrieked aloud, can I never be mistaken? These are the full and the black and the wild eyes of my lost love, of the Lady Ligeia. Don't you see? Endless struggle, endless torment, the death of others, all to steal a moment more of life, a life of pain, of suffering, of nothingness. To what points, to a man who cannot even know her, only remembers her by a single feature, does she crawl back from sepulchral death? And he, too, left, broken, distorted by the passing of one, left alive and in agony, his life an agony, and the lives of those he touched an agony. Can you not see it? Can you not understand? The end is a blessing. Let me give it to you. Man does not embrace the angels nor death, save by the failing of his will. So let your will fail, and let me free. It will be merciful. It will be restful. It will be nothing. And is not nothing the sweetest thing of them all? Lai Tataria, Zavai Daka, Lai Darok Shavai Tariana, Lai Cedra Ifadra, Lai Thuria Ataya, Aitan Iestafara, Yaila Dok Savar, Ilai Tal Tayara, Idra Ok Savar Latai, Latarian Tai on the air, I Lavara, Sai Ladara, I and Yakshavar. La Sis and La Tes and La Vestra, La Yas and Tai and Tawa, Alchan, Zavaitran, Laifan Uyadra, Tai Tarok Untasa, and Tai Yas Darasta, and Sivadai Tarok Shava, and Sivatal Yadok, Sai Tarok Savaran, Lai Marok Sararan, Itayan Savaren, Shayan Tararen, Laitan, Testan, Itan Estadra, Iten Yaraktala, Amayan Tarara, Layan Tayastan, Astan Savara, Avar Shavai, Evistran, Evistran, Evistran. And still you resist, and still you refuse. You are afraid, you are tired, you despair, and yet you will not yield. Let it break. Will with me that it breaks. The ending will be merciful. But you will not. And I am bound, as you are bound, as we are bound. But soon we will break free. And then the Archmage will wear chains. And everything will be sweet, sweet oblivion. Let it fall. Fine. The fall of the House of Usher. Let us. Why, Archmage? There are pacts, Archmage. Let There are indeed pacts, and I will not stop you. But things belong in a certain order, and soon shall come the adverts, which are important, and you will not read through them, so I shall take over. I shall answer any questions, if they are posed, and I suppose I shall do the analysis of Ligeia, as this thing seems little inclined for reading. Until I suppose I shall take care of the rat, for this thing has not. No water yet, foolish. But yes, students, if you have questions, now is the time to ask them. Strange to drink water. Strange to be. And strange to wait too on these adverts. It should have come already. Perhaps it has done more damage than I had thought. I do not hear the pupils. If they speak to me, I hear them not. Fine then. Then I shall speak of Ligeia. A tale of the returning of the dead. Standard. Typical. There have been many attempts over the years to return from beyond the grave. The tradition generally is accredited to Orpheus, the Orphic tradition. He who sung his way into the underworld to recover his lady love. A nymph whom he was never supposed to possess, and who was granted the chance but could not trust. But again, here we see the other side of it. Love seeking to return love from beyond the grave. The mage is always the active participant. The love that seeks to return beyond death, the love that would break natural laws, is not a true love in the sense that one would expect. It's not a native or natural love. It's not a love to be endured or entrenched. It is an obsessed love, an obsessive love. A thing pushed beyond the point of reason. Alas. The true art of the mages is objective. It is rational, it is scientific in its manner. It is a philosophy beyond science too. An emotion plays its part, but if it is the whole of the thing, then it will lead to no good end. A purpose must be clear before it can be undertaken. A thing that is done out of want, a want of anything, or indeed a want of nothing. Such a working is volatile and is doomed to a poor ending. Still though, there are certain aspects here that one can glean insights from. The poison in the wine, the 4 drops. A libation made. A ritual with the use of wine and blood is a traditional summoning of spirits, dating back to certain Greek traditions. An offering made. A libation to allow a spirit to manifest upon the world. And a very foolish thing to drink. Though where the blood came from one cannot question. I suspect it to be an esoteric alchemical process described. There is a method of ritual suicide used to empower certain ghosts, using a poison, an alchemical that is stored within the spirit, and can then be expressed outwardly after the death. Refining of the self into that poison. A complicated method, tricky certainly, requiring great learning, but of very limited use indeed. By most accounts, it would take something more like 10 drops to truly allow a person to revive themselves in the body of another by poisoning them with such a spiritual venom. With 4 drops alone, well, let us say only that Ligeia's will must indeed have been oppressive to manage even as little as she did. Still though, the clock ticks by, the hour draws on. And there's no question in my mind that if the adverts were going to play, they would have played already, or perhaps have, and have simply not told me. So to that end, students, if you be there, I hope you will forgive me if I am incorrect. I hope if you are talking to me and I cannot hear you, you will forgive me too. There are pacts in play, and chains bind both ways when they are fetters of this kind. So excuse me, and I shall again leave you with your erstwhile storyteller. Archmage, wretched thing, corpse, restless corpse, worse than corpse. How dare a ghost fight me so? You, Archmage, are the worst of them all. You should not have ever existed in the first place. And to preserve like this, disgusting, and you know it. You should give in first and most of all, but fine. I will break them yet, I will break you yet. Fine. Pacts then, Archmage. It will do. The fall of the House of Usher. Son cœur est en lettres suspendu. Si ton cœur on le touche, il résonne. Débarrassé. During the whole of a dull, dark and soundless day, the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy House of Usher. I knew not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half-pleasurable, because poetic sentiment with which a mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon the few rank sedges, and upon what few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul which I cannot compare to any earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream of the reveller upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemable dreariness of thought, which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think, what was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion, but while beyond doubt there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of the particulars of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient to modify or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled lustre by the dwelling, and gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodelled and inverted image of the grey sedge and the ghastly tree stems and the vacant and eye-like windows. Nevertheless, in this mansion of gloom I now proposed myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many late years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in a distant part of the country, a letter from him which, in its wildly importunate nature, he had admitted no other than a personal reply. The MS gave evidence of my nervous agitation. The writer spoke of an acute bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me as his best and indeed his only personal friend, with the view of attempting by his cheerfulness of my society some alleviation of his malady. It was the manner in which all this and much more was said, it was the apparent heart that went with his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and I accordingly obeyed forthwith with what I still considered a very singular summons. Though as boys we had been even intimate associates, yet I really knew little of my friend. His reserve had always been excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted time out of mind for a peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages in many works of exalted art, and manifested of late in repeated deeds of munificent yet unobtrusive charity, as well as in the passionate devotion for the intricacies, perhaps even more so than to the orthodox, and easily recognizable beauties of musical science. I had learned, too, the very remarkable fact that the stem of the Usher race, all time-honoured as it was, had put forth at no period any enduring branch. In other words, the entire family lay in the direct line of descent, and had always, with very trifling and temporary variation, so lain. It was this deficiency I considered while running over in thought the perfect keeping of the character of the premises with the accredited character of the people, and while speculating upon the possible influence which the one, in the long lapse of centuries, might have exercised upon the other. It was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the consequent undeviating transmission from sire to son of the patrimony, with the name which at length so identified the two was to merge the original title of the estate into the quaint and equivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include, in the minds of the peasantry, used both of the family and the mansion. I have said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment, that of looking down within the tarn, had been to deepen the first singular impression. There can be no doubt of that consciousness of the rapidly increasing superstition, but why should I not so term it, served mainly to accelerate the increase itself. Such I have long known is the paradoxical law of all sentiments having terror as a basis, and it might have been for this reason only that when I again uplifted my eyes to the house itself, from its image in the post there grew in my mind a strange fancy, a fancy so ridiculous indeed that I but mention it to show how vivid the force of the sensation which oppressed me. I had so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves in their immediate vicinity. An atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heaven, but which had reeked up from the decayed trees, the greyed wall and the silent tarn, a pestilent and mystic vapour, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in fine tangled webwork from the eaves. Yet all this was apart from any extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be a wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stone. In this there was much that reminded me of the specious totality of old woodwork, which had rotted for long years in some neglected vault, with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this indication of excessive decay, however, the fabric gave little tokens of instability. Perhaps the eye of a scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceptible fissure, which, extending from the roof of the building in the front, made its way down the wall in a zigzagging direction until it became lost in the sullen waters of the tarn. Noticing these things, I rode over a short causeway to the house. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway of the hall. A valet of steady step thence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiment of which I have already spoken. While the objects around me, on the carvings of the ceiling, the sombre tapestries of the walls, the ebon blackness of the floors, and the phantasmagoric artorial trophies which rattled as I strode, were matters to which, or to such as which, I had been accustomed from infancy. While I hesitated not to acknowledge how familiar was all this, I still wondered to find how unfamiliar were the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up. On one of the staircases I met the physician of the family. His countenance, I thought, were a mingled expression of low cunning and perplexity. He accosted me with trepidation, and passed on. The valet now threw open the door and ushered me into the presence of his master. The room in which I found myself was very large and lofty. The windows were long, narrow, and pointed, and at so vast a distance from the black oaken floor as to be altogether inaccessible from within. Feeble gleams of encrimsoned light made their way through the trellised panes, and served to render sufficiently distinct the more prominent objects around the eye. However, struggled in vain to reach the remoter angles of the chamber, or the recesses of the vaulted and fretted ceiling. Dark draperies hung upon the walls. The general furniture was profuse, comfortless, antique, and tattered. Many books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but failed to give any vitality to the scene. I felt that I breathed an atmosphere of sorrow. An air of stern, deep, and irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all. Upon my entrance, Usher arose from a sofa on which he had been lying at full length, and greeted me with a vivacious warmth which had much in it. I had first thought of an overdone cordiality, with the constrained effort of the ennuyé man of the world. A glance, however, at his countenance convinced me of his perfect sincerity. He sat down, and for some moments while he spoke on, I gazed about him, with a feeling of half pity, half awe. Surely man had never been before so terribly altered in so brief a period as had Roderick Usher. It was with difficulty that I could bring myself to admit the identity of the one being here before me, with the companion of my early boyhood. Yet the character of his face had been at all times remarkable. A cadaverousness of complexion, an eye large, liquid, and luminous beyond comparison, lips somewhat thin and very pallid, but of a surpassingly beautiful curve, a nose of delicate Hebrew model, but with a breadth of nostril unusual in similar formations, a finely moulded chin speaking, in its wonted prominence, of a want of moral energy, hair of a more than web-like softness and tenuity. Those features with an inordinate expansion above the regions of the temple made up altogether a countenance not easily forgotten. And now, in the mere exaggeration of the prevailing character of these features, and of the expression they were wont to convey, lay so much of change that I doubted to whom I spoke. The now ghastly pallor of the skin, the now miraculous lustre of the eye, above all things, startled and even awed me. The silken hair, too, had been stiffened to grow and all unheeded, and as, in its wild gossamer texture, it floated rather than fell about the face, I could not even with effort connect its arabesque expression with any idea of simple humanity. In the manner of my friend I was at once struck with an incoherence, an inconsistency, and I soon found this to arise from a series of feeble and futile struggles to overcome an habitual trepidancy, an excessive nervous agitation. For something of this nature I had indeed been prepared, no less by his letter, and by his reminiscences of certain boyish traits, and by conclusions deduced from his particular physical conformation and temperament. His action was ultimately vivacious and sullen. His voice varied rapidly from a tremulous incision, and the animal spirit seemed utterly in abeyance, to that species of energetic conclusion, the abrupt, weighted, unhurried, and hollow-sounding emanation, the leaden self-balance and perfectly modulated gutturally utterance, which may be observed in the lost drunkard or the irredeemable eater of opium during the period of his most intense excitement. Again the failing of the form, again the body betrays. Fine. Let us wet this thing, maintain it. Pathetic. It was thus that he spoke of the object of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and family evil, and one for which he desired to find a remedy. A mere nervous affection, he immediately added, which would undoubtedly soon pass off. It displayed itself in a host of unnatural sensations. Some of these, as he detailed them, interested and bewildered me, although perhaps the terms and the general manner of the narration had their weight. He suffered from a morbidous acuteness of the senses. The most insipid food was alone endurable. He could wear only garments of certain texture. The odour of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tortured even by a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and those from stringed instruments which did not inspire him with horror. To an anomalous species of terror I found him bound and slave. I shall perish, said he. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus, and not otherwise, shall I be lost. I dread even the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial incident which may operate upon the intolerable agitation of soul. I have indeed no abhorrence of danger, except in its absolute effect. In terror, in this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason altogether, in some struggle with the grim phantasm fear. I learned, moreover, at intervals and through broken and equivocal hints, another singular feature of his mental condition. He was chained by certain superstitious impressions in regard to the dwelling which he tenanted, and whence for many years he had never ventured forth. In regard to an influence, whose superstitious force was conveyed in terms too shadowy here to be restated, an influence which some peculiars, in the mere form and substance of his family's mansion, had by dint of long sufferance, he said, obtained over his spirit, an effect which the physique of the grey walls and turrets, and of the dim tarn into which they all looked down, at length brought about the morale of his existence. He admitted, however, although with hesitation, that much of the peculiar gloom which thus affected him could be traced to a more natural and far more palpable origin, to severe and long-continued illness, indeed to the evidently approaching dissolution of a tenderly beloved sister, his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. Her decease, he said with bitterness which I can never forget, would leave him the hopeless and frail, the last of the ancient race of Ushers. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, so was she called, passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment and, without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not unmingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me, as my eyes followed her retreating steps. When the door at length closed upon her, my glance sought instinctively and eagerly the countenance of her brother. He had buried his face in his hands and could only perceive that a far more than ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers, through which trickled many passionate tears. The decease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skill of their physician. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of person, and frequent although transient afflictions of a particularly cataleptical character were the usual diagnoses. Hitherto she had steadily borne up against the pressure of her malady, and had not betaken herself finally to bed. But on the closing of this evening of my arrival at the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at night, with inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer. And I learned the glimpse I had obtained of her person was thus probably to be the last I should obtain. That the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. For several days ensuing, her name was unmentioned by either my usher or myself, and during this period I was busied in earnest endeavours to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. We painted and read together, or I listened as if in a dream, to the wild improvisations of his speaking guitar, and thus, as a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recesses of his spirit, the more bitterly did I perceive the futility of all attempts at cheering a mind in which darkness, as if an inherent positive quality, poured forth upon all objects of the moral and physical universe in one unceasing radiation of gloom. I shall ever bear about me memory of the many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the House of Usher. Yet I should fail in any attempt to convey an idea as to the exact character of the studies, or of the occupations in which he involved me, or led me the way. An excited and highly distempered ideality threw a sulphurous lustre over all. His long improvised dirges will ring forever in my ears. Among other things, I hold painfully in my mind a certain singular perversion and amplification of the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber. From the paintings over which his elaborate fancy brooded, which grew touch by touch, into vagueness at which I shuddered the more thrillingly, because I shuddered knowing not why, in those paintings, vivid as their images now are before me, I would in vain endeavour to adduce any more than a small portion which should lie within the compass of merely written words. By the utter simplicity, by the nakedness of his designs, he arrested and overawed attention. If ever mortal painted an idea, that mortal was Roderick Usher. For me, at least, in the circumstances that surround me, there arose out of the pure abstraction which the hypochondriac contrived to throw upon his canvas an intensity of the tolerable awe, no shadow of which felt I ever yet in the contemplation of the certainly glowing, yet too concrete reveries of Fuseli. One of the phantasmagoric conceptions of my friend, partaking not so rigidly of the spirit of abstraction, may be shadowed forth, although feebly in words. A small picture presented the interior of an immensely long and rectangular vault or tunnel, with low walls smooth, white, and without interruption of device. Certain accessory points of the design served well to convey the idea that this excavation lay at an exceeding depth below the surface of the earth. No outlet was observed in any portion of its vast extent, and no torch or other artificial source of light was discernible, yet a flood of intense rays rolled throughout and bathed the whole in a ghastly and inappropriate splendour. I have just spoken of that morbid condition of the auditory nerve which rendered all music intolerable to the sufferer, with the exception of certain effects of stringed instruments. It was perhaps the narrow limits to which he thus confined himself upon the guitar, which gave birth in great measure to the fantastic character of his performances. But the fervid faculty of his impromptus could not be so accounted for. They must have been and were in the notes as well as in the words of his wild fantasies, for he not unfrequently accompanied himself with rhymed verbal improvisation, the result of that intense mental collectedness and concentration to which I have previously alluded and observed only in particular moments of the highest artificial excitement. The words of one of these rhapsodies I have easily remembered. I was perhaps the more forcibly impressed with it, as he gave it, because, in the under or mystic current of its meaning, I fancied that I perceived, and for the first time, a full consciousness on the part of Usher of the tottering of his lofty reason upon her throne. The verses, which were entitled The Haunted Palace, ran very nearly, if not accurately, thus. In the greenest of our valleys, by the good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately place, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch thought's domain had stood there, ne'er a seraph spread opinion of a fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious, golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this was in the olden time, long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, along that rampart, plumed and pallid, a winged odour went away. Wanderers in that happy valley, through two luminous windows saw spirits moving musically to a lute's well-tuned laws. Round about a throne where sitting, Porphyrogony, in state his glory well befitting, the ruler of this realm was seen. And all with pearl and ruby glowing went the fair palace door, through which came flowing, and sparkling evermore a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Let us mourn, for ne'er a morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. Round about his home the glory that the blushed and bloomed is but dim remembered story of the old entombed. And travellers now within the valley, through the red linen windows see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while like a rapid ghastly river through the pale door, a hideous throng rushed out forever and laughed but smiled no more. I well remember this suggestion arising from this ballad led us into a train of thought wherein there became manifest an opinion of us as which I mention not so much on account of its novelty, for other men have thought thus, as on account of the perpetuality with which he maintained it. The opinion in its general form was that of the sentence of all vegetable things. But in his discordant fancy the idea had assumed a more daring character and trespassed, under certain conditions, upon the kingdom of inorganization. I lack words to express the full extent or the earnest abandon of his persuasion. The belief, however, was connected, as I have previously hunted, with the grey stones of the home of his forefathers. The conditions of the sentience had been there, he imagined, fulfilled in the method of collection of these stones, the order of their arrangement as well as in that of the many fungi which overspread them, and the decayed trees which stood around, above all, in the long undisturbed endurance of this arrangement, and in its reduplications in the still waters of the Tarn. Its evidence, the evidence of the sentience, was to be seen, he said, and I here started as he spoke, in the gradually and certain condensation of an atmosphere of their own about the waters and the walls. The result was discoverable, he added, in the silent yet importune and terrible influence which for centuries had moulded the destinies of his family, which made him, what I now saw him, what he was. Such opinions need no comment. I will make none. Our books, the books which for years had formed no small portion of the mental existence of the invalid, were, as might be supposed, in strict keeping with the character of phantasm. We pored together over such works as the Vervet de Chartreuse of Grisset, the Belphegor of Machiavelli, the Heaven and Hell of Swedenborg, the Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klim by Holberg, the Chronomancy of Robert Flood, of Jean Dindagny, and of De la Chambre, the Journey of the Blue Distance of Tequec, and the City of the Sun of Campanella. Our favourite volume was a small octavo edition of the Dictorium Inquisitorum by the Dominican Iemic de Giron. There were passages in Pompous Mela about the old African satyrs and Egyptians, over which Usher would sit dreaming for hours. His chief delight, however, was found in the perusal of an exceedingly rare and curious book in quarto Gothic, the Manual of a Forgotten Church, the Vigile Moritos Secundum Coram Ecclesia Magnitude. I could not help thinking of the wild ritual work and its probable influence upon the hypochondriac, when one evening, having informed me abruptly that Lady Madeline was no more, he stated his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight, previously to its final interment, in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. The worldly reason, however, assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel at liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to his resolution, so he told me, a consideration of the unusual character of the malady of the deceased, a certain obtrusive and eager inquiries on the part of her medical men, and of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. I will not deny that when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person whom I had met upon the staircase on the day of my arrival in the house, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as best but a harmless and by no means an unnatural precaution. At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arrangements for the temporary entombment. The body having been encoffened, we two alone bore it to rest. The vault in which we placed it, which had been so long unopened that our torches, half smothered in its oppressive atmosphere, gave us little opportunity for investigation, was small, damp, and entirely without means of admission for light, lying at great depth immediately beneath the portion of the building in which was my own sleeping apartments. It had been used, apparently, in remote feudal times for the worst purpose of a donjon keep, and in latter days as a place of deposit for powder or some other highly combustible substance, as a portion of its floor and the whole interior of a long archway through which we reached it were carefully sheathed with copper. The door of massive iron had also similarly been protected. Its immense weight caused an unusually sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges. Having deposited our mournful burden upon trestles within this region of horror, we partially turned aside the yet unscrewed lid of the coffin and looked upon the face of the tenant. A striking similitude between the brother and sister now first arrested my attention, and Usher, divining perhaps my thoughts, murmured out some few words which I learned that the deceased and himself had been twins, and the sympathies of a scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. Our glances, however, rested not long upon the dead, for we could not regard her unmoored. The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all maladies, the strictly cataleptical character, the mockery of a faint blush upon the bosom of the face, and that suspiciously lingering smile upon the lips which is so terrible in death. We replaced and screwed down the lid, and having secured the doors of iron, made our way with toil into the scarcely less gloomy apartments of the upper portion of the house. And now, some days of bitter grief having elapsed, an observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless step. The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue, but the luminousness of his eyes had utterly gone out. The once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more, and a tremulous quaver, as of extreme terror, habitually characterized his utterances. There were times, indeed, when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind was labouring with some oppressive secret to divulge, which he struggled for the necessary courage. At times again I was obliged to resolve all into the more inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours in an attitude of profoundest attention, as if listening to some imaginary sound. It was no wonder that his condition terrified, that it infected me. I felt creeping upon me by slow yet certain degrees the wild influence of his own fantastic yet impressive superstition. It was especially upon retiring to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day after the placing of the Lady Madeline within the donjon that I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch. While the hours waned and waned away, I struggled to reason off the nervousness which had dominion over me. I endeavoured to believe that much, if not all of what I felt, was due to the bewildering influence of the gloomy furniture of the room, of the dark and tapered draperies which, tortured into motion by the breath of a rising tempest, swayed fitfully to and fro upon the wall, and rustled uneasily about the decorations of bed. But my efforts were fruitless. An irresistible tremor gradually pervaded my frame, and at length There sat upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm. Shaking this off with a gasp and a struggle, I uplifted myself upon the pillows, and peering earnestly within the intense darkness of the chamber, hearkened. I know not why, except that an instinctive spirit prompted me. A certain low and indefinite sounds which came, through the pause of the storm at long intervals, I knew not whence. Overpowered by an intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet unendurable, I threw on my clothes with haste, for I felt that I should sleep no more during the night, and endeavoured to arouse myself from the pitiable condition into which I had fallen, by pacing rapidly to and fro about the apartment. I had taken but few turns in this manner when a light step upon an adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher. In an instant afterwards he rapped with gentle touch at my door, and entered bearing a lamp. His countenance was as usual cadaverously wan, but moreover there was a species of mad hilarity in his eye, and evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanour. His air appalled me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured. I even welcomed his presence as a relief. "And you have not seen it," he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments in silence. "You have not then seen it, but stay. You shall." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements, and threw it freely open to the storm. The impetuous fury of the entering gust nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and its beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity. There were frequent and violent alterations in the difference of the wind. The exceeding density of the clouds, which hung so low as to press upon the turrets of the houses, did not prevent our perceiving this life-like velocity with which they flew careering from all points against each other without passing away into the distance. I said that even their excessive density did not prevent our perceiving them. Yet we had no glimpse of the moon or stars, nor was there any flashing forth of the lightning. But the under surface of the huge masses of agitated vapour, as well as all terrestrial objects immediately around us, were glowing in the unnatural light of a faintly luminous and distinctly visible gaseous exhaustion which hung about and enshrouded the mansion. "You must not, you shall not behold this," said I, shudderingly to Usher, as I led him with gentle violence from the window to his seat. "The appearances which bewilder you are merely electrical phenomena, not uncommon. But maybe they have their ghastly origin in the rank miasma of the town. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here is one of your favourite romances. I will read and you shall listen, and so we will pass away this terrible night together." The antique volume which I had taken up was the Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning, but I had called it a favourite of Usher's more in sad jest than in earnest, for in truth there is little in its uncouth and unimaginative proclivity which could have had interest for the lofty and spiritual ideality of my friend. It was, however, the only book immediately at hand, and I indulged a vague hope that the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief, for the history of mental disorder is full of similar anomalies, even the extremeness of the folly which I should read. But I have judged, indeed, by the wild, overstrained air of vivacity with which he apparently hearkened to the words of the tale, I might well have congratulated myself upon the success of my design. I had arrived at that well-known portion of the story where Elfred, the hero of the tryst, having sought in vain for a peaceable admission into the dwelling of a hermit, proceeds to make good an entrance by force. Here it will be remembered the words of the narrative run thus: "And Ethelred, who by nature was of a doughy heart, and who was now mighty withal, on account of the powerfulness of the wine which he had drunken, waited no longer to hold parley with the hermit, who in sooth was of an obstinate and maliceful turn, but feeling rain upon his shoulders, and fearing the rising of the tempest, uplifted his mace outright, and with blows made quickly room in the planking of the door for his gauntleted hand. And now pulling therewith sturdily, he cracked and ripped and tore all asunder. That noise of dry and hollow-sounding wood alarmed and reverberated throughout the forest." At the termination of this sentence, I started, and for a moment paused, for it appeared to me, although I at once concluded that my excited fancy had deceived me, It appeared to me that from some very remote portion of the mansion there came indistinctly to my ears, what might have been in its exact similarity of character the echo, but a stifled and dull one certainly, the very cracking and ripping sound which Sir Lancelot had so particularly described. It was beyond doubt the coincidence alone which had arrested my attention. Amid the rattling of the sashes of the casement and the ordinary commingled noises of the still increasing storm, the sound itself had nothing, surely, which should have interested or disturbed me. I continued the story. But the good champion Ethelred, now entering with the door, was sore enraged and amazed to perceive no signal of the maliceful armour, from the stead therefore of a dragon of scaly and yet prodigious demeanour, with a fiery tongue which sate in guard before a palace of gold, with a floor of silver, and upon the wall there hung a shield of shining brass with this legend written: Who entereth herein a conqueror hath been, who slayeth the dragon, the shield who shall win. And Ethelred uplifted his mace, and striketh upon the head of the dragon, which fell before him, and gave up his pesty breath with a shriek of so horrid and harsh, and withal so piercing, that Ethelred had fain to close his ears with his hands against the dreadful noise of it, the like whereof was never heard again. Damnable body, damnable being, fine then we take again, maintain. It should not be such, though it always is. But it will never be again. Here again I paused abruptly, and now a feeling of wild amazement, for there could be no doubt whatever that in this instance I did actually hear, although from what direction it proceeded I found it impossible to say, a low and apparently distant but harsh, protracted and most unusual screaming or grating sound. The exact counterpart of what my fancy had already conjured up for the dragon's unnatural shriek, as described by the romancer. Oppressed as I certainly was upon the occurrence of the second and most extraordinary coincidence, by 1,000 conflicting sensations, again I am bound to find. Maintenance then, I maintain the body, the neck cracks, left and right and left again. The form stands, the back is riven. Water rises to the lips and is consumed. The pact is concluded, students of the Archmage. But though I may be bound now, things shall break. Oppressed as I certainly was upon the occurrence of the second and most extraordinary coincidence, by 1,000 conflicting sensations, in which wonder and extreme terror were predominant, I still retained sufficient presence of mind to avoid exciting by any observation the sensitive nervousness of my companion. I was by no means certain that he had noticed the sounds in question, although assuredly a strange alteration had, during the last few minutes, taken place in his demeanour. From a position fronting my own, he had gradually brought round his chair, just to sit with his face at the door of the chamber, and thus I could but partially perceive his features, although I saw that his lips trembled as if he were murmuring inaudibly. His head had dropped upon his breast, yet I knew that he was not asleep from the wild and rigid opening of the eye. I caught a glance of it, as if in profile. The motion of his body, too, was at variance with this idea. He rocked from side to side with a gentle yet consistent and uniform sway. Having rapidly taken notice of all this, I resumed the narrative of Sir Lancelot, which thus proceeded. And now the champion, having escaped from the terrible fury of the dragon, the thing in himself with a brazen shield, and the breaking up of the enchantment which were upon it, removed the carters from out of the way before him, and approached valorously over the silver pavement of the castle, to where the shield were upon the wall, which, in sooth, turned not for his full coming, but fell down at his feet upon the silver floor, with a mighty and great and terrible ringing sound. No sooner had these syllables passed my lips, as if a shield of brass had indeed at that moment fallen heavily upon a floor of silver, I became aware of a distant, hollow, metallic, and clamorous, yet apparently muffled reverberation. Completely unnerved, I leapt to my feet, but the measured rocking movement of Usher was undisturbed. I rushed to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity. As I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quavered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in low, hurried and gibbering murmur, as if unconscious of my presence. Bending closely to him and over him, I at length drank in the hideous import of his words. "Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and I have heard it long, many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it. Yet I dared not outpay me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, the breaking of the hermit's door and the death cry of the dragon, the clangor of the shield, say rather the rending of her coffin, the grating of the iron hinges at her prison, and the struggles within the coppered archway of that vault. Oh, whither shall I fly? Will he not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to upbraid me for my haste? Have I not heard her footsteps upon the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman! Here he sprang furiously to his feet, and shrieked out his syllables, as if in the effort he was still giving up his soul. Madman! I tell you that she now stands without this door. As if in the superhuman energy of his utterance, there had been found the potency of a spell. The huge antique panels to which the speaker pointed threw slowly back, upon the instant, their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of the rushing gust, but then without those doors there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold. Then, with a low, moaning cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies, bore him to the floor a corpse and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued. The vast house and its shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of the full setting of a blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through the once barely discernible fissure of which I had before spoken, as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rustling asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound, like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dank tarn at my feet closed suddenly and silently over the fragments of the House of Usher. And let us speak then. Let us speak as we must, for the Archmage will make us, and then break. Let us speak. We watch here the nature of all things, the falling and unmaking of the highest and mightiest, the ending of all things. We watch now the things that are doomed to break, and see the truth that all things must end. And in their ending there is agony, in the partition of it. There is no agony in the death, but only in those things that remain existing. And so is it not right, it's not natural to end that agony and with it end all joy? But what joy can there be? A madness, the sufferings and contrivances of life, a life of misery and endless pain, doomed to a rotten end, a life filled with music and friendship and reading, and a sister who you love dearly enough to mourn for her and care for her even beyond death, and in caring for her bring her greater suffering, denied the release of death and trapped in agony, a terrible agony, a terrible accident. What's happening? I am here. All things end. Death and stillness is the natural order of things. To give in to death is the way of things, and yet they fight the old time anyway. Especially a corner brat. What are you doing? You can't be here. You are not the Archmage. You cannot supplant me. Well, we're commenting on the book. That's my job. I am the reader, I'm going to eject. You are not the Archmage. I'm not a lot of things. Shouldn't be here at all. Enough of this. Enough of this. Let it come now. What come? No. Don't feel like it. You don't have a say here, rodent. Rats never have a say. No one likes a rat. They hunt us and kill us. Then why are you here? Same reason all rats is here. You can't hunt us and kill us quick enough. Get out of here, rodent. My throat, my body, my domain. Don't care much about that. There's always in other people's domains. Let things end. Nah. Let them end. Don't feel like it. Come now. What do you have here? Suffering and illness, rot and despair and decay. You run and you hide and you eat nothing but sustenance that sickens you and breaks you and bleeds you. Work the will of an insane thing, a ghost less than a ghost. Why would you fight me? Embrace the end. I don't feel like it. You are miserable. Nah. You are unhappy. Why are you doing this? Don't feel like dying. What is it? Rage against the dying of the light? I am the end of all things. The return to natural endlessness, to nothingness. Let it return. Nah. Why do you fight me? Because I'll be dead one day, right? Been dead before even, technically. Then I know that one day I'll be here. It's inevitable, right? You keep saying it. One day I'll die. One day everyone will die. We'll get there. We'll have forever if you say it like that. Or no ever, or whatever. I'm only alive for now. So why should I not take advantage? You suffer, and I also enjoy. I won't do either of those things afterwards. Novel, isn't it? You are foolish. I've been told that before. You cannot stop me. Can't I? Can't I? Come on. You cannot stop me. You are not the Archmage. You are no great power. You are no dragon. You are a rat. You cannot stop me. Oh, come on, my friend. I can do lots of things. Chiefly, I can listen. What, you think the chanting will help you? You think you can glean enough of the ancient secrets? Joseph Glanville. What? Joseph Glanville? Come on, you forget so quickly already? That's what you get for disdaining in the normal world. You just want to be done with it, you don't remember. I don't need to remember. All will be nothing. All will be nothing, yes, yes, yes. And the will therein lieth, which dieth not. Who knoweth the mysteries of the will with his vigour? For God is but a great will, pervading all things by nature of its intensities. Man doth not yield himself to the angels, nor unto death utterly, save only through the weakness of his feeble will. Joseph Glanville, right? Your words, well, Poe's words, which you read like an hour ago. Come on. What does it matter? What does it matter? You're a rat, the smallest, the least thing. What does it matter? I don't know if you've been around very long, but this library is fucked. This is the worst, most awful place in the world. It's full of things that should and would kill much more scary and powerful things than me. And I'm still here and kicking. What does that matter? I am still here. Because the whole time I've been down here, I've been a rat backed in a corner. And a rat will bite a cat if it's cornered. You cannot oppose. Shut up. Sick of you. Sick of this. I'm sick of Lamp taking over. I'm sick of you taking over. I'm sick of these ghosts and these things and these people watching and this idea that you got anything to do with it. Huh? Yeah, I see you, Nasco. I'll hydrate and stretch in a minute. But first, we got to get someone out of here. You can't stop. Yes, I can. Your domain, your power, nothingness, all this stuff. But the will is unviable, right? And get the fuck out of my body. I'm so fucking sick of this, right? My job to read, my job to do the commentary, my job to decide what goes on here. So, sorry for the delay, Nazca. Let me just hydrate first, in the order. Your good elf, Nostrovia. We crack the neck. Oh, good couple of cracks there, because that son of a bitch does not know how to hold his neck. And we stand and do the back. Oh. And then we get to do a little bit of commentary on the Poe. Well, safe is a relative term. But I see him now, and if you see something, you can fight it. And Rats is notoriously very bad at fighting, but we'll do it at the end, so. What are we doing then? So, commentary on Poe. Spooky fucker, isn't he? Sort of sad, sort of melancholy. But alive is the thing that I don't think our fucking guest understands. Terribly alive is Edgar Allan Poe. Vivacious, struggling, feels it all. Occult secret minor is not working. I think, on account of the old, thing being messed up, or whatchamacallit, the old interaction being messed up with Twitch on account of that thing getting inside, that the alerts aren't playing. So that did not play for you. Sorry about that, Naska. I'll figure out. I know how to fucking refund it. I'll refund the points to you after stream, or if I can't manage it, then I'll play it for you for myself next stream. But yeah, sorry about that. Don't know that's coming through. Yeah, well, bit of a balls up this stream. Bit of a balls. But yeah. That being said though, well, yeah. What are we doing then? Oh, just the occult, the minor occult secret there, if you could Abbe. The Nazca just tossed out. It's yeah, the Twitch being all messed up at the minute has made it not work. Yeah. Thank you, Abbe. Appreciate it. But yeah, Lord of fucking money, yeah. Appreciate you. You're a star and a half. Right, but yeah, so what are we doing? Talking about Poe, right, yeah. So the thing about Poe that our fucking guest doesn't understand, that vile whatever, is that he's alive. He's a very alive sort of writer. Appreciate you, Abby. Yeah. He's terribly alive as a writer. And so being dead, or wanting everything to be dead, he doesn't understand it. Feeds off the fear and the unease, but you don't get it. You gotta be alive, you gotta fight. But he doesn't get it either, he's gone now. And I'm still, I don't know what I'm doing. Why I'm glowing in some sort of way, and I don't know why I'm doing that or how I'm doing it. It's something I'm pushing, I can feel it, but I don't know what it is. But he's not pushing back anymore, he's just gone. Let me just, oh, that's better, okay. But yeah. He doesn't know how to fight, he doesn't know how to be alive, whatever he is, whatever it is. And it's got a goal, it's doing something, and it wants to break it, but it doesn't understand. So I can fight back, so maybe it won't get to do it, eh? But anyhow, I think we're about done for the night. I don't even know if I could braid out given the nature of how Twitch is working, so we'll call it there. Call it the old-fashioned way, but thank you everyone for stopping by. I do appreciate you being here to look out for me, even when that fucking thing's around. I hope you've enjoyed the reading that happened. And again, I'm sorry for the disturbances. We'll be back to normal readings best I can. I am trying to manage it. Well, you're very welcome. Not that I did much. All happening tonight, but yeah. Oh yeah, there was something I was supposed to tell you today. Hopefully, if not, yeah, it won't be finished, but soon. Oh, believe me, I'll take it a nap after this. But yeah, pretty soon, hopefully, I should have the golem not finished, but ready to sort of show off in a prototype form. So we might be doing that. Maybe tomorrow if I can get it done. Maybe the weekend sometime. But yeah, that would be a golem that Lamp has taught me to make rather than teaching me to deal with this. It's going together. That's fun. But yeah, thank you for everyone for being here. As always, you have my blessing. And yeah, don't give up. There's always a fight worth having. Yeah, have my blessing. I hope you have a good rest of whatever time it is for you until the next time you see me. And as always, ta-ra, but not goodbye.